Hi, this is Mr. Cordes, and today we are going to analyze the timed writing prompt for the short story Half a Day. This short story goes back and forth and can be rather confusing if you're not tracking along and paying attention. Looking at the story itself, I'm going to head back over to the other document. Looking at the story itself, it does encompass the concept of time. Looking at the narrator who kind of jumps back and forth between different stages of life. As you go through, you begin to notice his perspective and how his perspective changes, whether he is a father or whether he is a son, or even some people say that he is the grandpa. But for this moment, you are kind of looking at how does time construct itself in our story. So looking at, if you need a chance to reread, go ahead and go back and reread. Today, what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we are going to pull apart and analyze the prompt. I would strongly suggest pulling up an empty Google Doc so that you can kind of type in this. This is the same prompt that you will see later on when you do have to do your writing for this assignment. Looking here, it says you're going to analyze the significance of time in our short story in half a day. So the idea that the narrator jumps back and forth is pretty significant, especially when we get to the very end and talks about the grandpa. So your first task is to identify what is the concept of time and how does it connect to the theme of death. So you'll notice that suddenly characters are gone or they're experiencing that loss. That right there, how does time, or the concept of how quickly time is moving, or the concept of how fast life goes. You often hear people say the phrase like, oh, enjoy it while it lasts, indicating that it's going to disappear or be gone rather quickly. You've also heard people say, oh, they grow up so quickly. Yes, kids and people, we grow up rather quickly. Life is, in fact, short. So how does that theme of death connect to the concept of time? So if I'm going to make some notes for myself, I'm just going to, there we go, make a little note indentation so I know where my notes start. If I'm going to do anything, I'm going to say that the concept of time is short, okay, that we get that idea that life speeds past us. We experiencing rather, and as soon as we can, we almost have this reflective, we also have a reflective type of perspective because we are looking back. Okay. Adults will look back on their childhood and remember, one or two events. They'll remember how it used to be. So it's the idea of what is the perspective that becomes reflective as we get older. Okay. The other component here, now it's connected to the theme of death. So we see the theme of death, especially in the loss of loved ones, right? The idea of forgetting. It possibly could be the idea that this gentleman, our character, is suffering like from dementia or Alzheimer's, or his memory is lost. And so he has to, when he does reflect back, it's all jumbled and mixed up and not in a coherent sequence. So looking, maybe forgetting the past, right? Losing your mind, the idea of deteriorating before you actually die. The second part is, it says also what is meant when the narrator says there was no question of ever returning to the paradise of home, which is found on that second page. If we look at the connotations of home, we look at connotations and themes such as family. Okay, we looked at things that were safe, or home being a safety entity for us. The idea of home could also mean where love is, where life is happening. The idea that is such a place where it's hard to go back to that paradise. Paradise meaning that paradise essentially is equivalent to nothing is wrong. Okay. The idea that things are going great, things are wonderful. Let me put that in print, mark that down as two. Things things in life are wonderful in paradise. Okay. So what does the narrator mean by that? If he's thinking about lost ones, if he's thinking about his family, the idea of, him as a child looking at his dad, or him being a dad and looking at his child, or the generations that's in front of him, what does that look like then when he is thinking about there was a time and place where nothing was wrong? Okay. So take a moment. You're going to be also incorporating that theme of death. So we've already talked about loss of loved ones, forgetting the past. The other idea of death is that nothing lasts forever. Everyone will die. If you stretch historical timelines out, everyone will die at some point. So the idea of death is mixed in, okay? Death is mixed in with the narrative of family, of loved ones, of life experiences. Okay. Thinking back on my own life, it's the experiences I can remember. First year of college was when my grandfather died. Okay. And that was the first major family death. I had had deaths before, close friends who had died in high school. Now it was a family member who had died, which made it closer to home. Look at that. Home, the concept of my heart, the concept of things were right in the world where all of my family was alive and suddenly one was gone. So looking at that, you identify and explain the correlation to the stories, short stories theme of death. So how does the idea of time connect with the idea of death? How are they related? Okay. Maybe we'll write down that question. How is time connected to death? Okay. And then how does the narrator explain death through the concept of time? How does that work? How does he explain that death is inevitable? How is he explaining that his loved ones are lost? Okay. Please make sure that you have a clear thesis and supporting paragraphs. I would suggest at least 3 paragraphs with textual evidence and commentary. Your thesis statement, as a review for you guys, is the point you are trying to prove. And in this case, you are trying to prove that there's a correlation between death and time that's illustrated in our story by our author. Okay, so what is that? Why is that there? What do you think? How do you process this concept? Or if this is difficult for you to articulate, what is the author trying to tell readers about death and time? Maybe that's a question that you start with. The author is trying to tell readers that death and time, and then you can finish your sentence. What is he trying to say? Okay. So this right here, hopefully this has been beneficial for you. I would strongly suggest before your writing starts that you go back into the text and you annotate for ideas of time. I annotate for ideas of death. So maybe the idea that I was not convinced, I did not believe that there was really any good with me tearing away from home and throwing me into a huge high-walled building. So the idea of leaving home and becoming a worker. Okay. What about the concepts here where suddenly our path was not totally sweet and unclouded? So there was difficult times. Rivalries could bring about the pain. They're talking about the fighting that would happen on the playground. But then they talk about, I was in a daze. My head spun. I almost went crazy. Is that the concept of where you are losing your thought pattern or losing the concept of memory? And how fast life goes. And then he stretched out his arm and said, Grandpa, take me, let me take you across, looking at the street that they were referencing to. So how does all of that? I would suggest going back and annotating. This is a piece of textual evidence that I would use for death. This is a piece of textual evidence that I would use for the concept of time. And then write 2 or 3 sentences of commentary, your analysis. Here's why this shows that concept. Here's why this happens. Okay. So this has been the video for half a day analysis prompt. Use this video, use your notes, use your textual evidence when it comes time to your writing.